started, I need to make a couple important announcements about the functions of this meeting and the space. First and foremost, to all of the participants, please know that we are recording this event. So all of your video has been deactivated as well as the chat feature. Our purpose for recording this event is to ensure that we can reuse the great information we're sure to get and spotlight some of that important stuff later via social media, websites, etc. Regarding confidentiality, if you right-click on the upper right-hand corner of your profile, you can rename your profile if you wish to be viewed by a different name. Additionally, while the chat feature is closed, we are monitoring the Q&A. We would love your engagement. If you have questions, if anything was unclear and you'd like clarification, please do use the Q&A. My colleague from CCHR, Claire, and I will be monitoring that. You can ask questions through that feature anonymously as well. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce all of our speakers today. First of all, I'm going to introduce our moderator. Thank you so much, Jose, for agreeing and volunteering to be our moderator. Jose is the acting chief of staff for the New York City Commission on Human Rights, also known as CCHR. I'd also like to, it is my pleasure to introduce Commissioner Annabelle Palma. Commissioner Palma was appointed chair and commissioner of the New York City Commission on Human Rights, otherwise known as the Commission, in October 2021 by former Mayor Bill de Blasio. In 2003, Ms. Palma was elected to the New York City Council and dedicated her career to providing her community the voice they needed to fight for equality, education, safer schools, good paying jobs, affordable housing, a cleaner environment, and greater access to health care. She proudly served District 18 as New York City Council member for 14 years, then served as the Commissioner for Strategic Initiatives in the Department of Social Services, HRA, DHS. Under Commissioner Palma's tenure, the Commission has expanded protections under the New York City Human Rights Law for domestic workers and instituted pay transparency. Drawing on her struggles with poverty, Commissioner Palma has dedicated her life to fight for workers' rights and for fairer, more responsive representation in NYC's many communities. So thank you, Commissioner Palma, for your time today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Next, it's my privilege to introduce ENDGBV's first Deputy Commissioner, Saloni Sethi. Saloni Sethi is the first Deputy Commissioner for the Mayor's Office to End Domestic and Gender-Based Violence. We also go by ENDGBV because that is quite a mouthful. In that role, she focuses on overseeing operations across our office to ensure that diverse groups of survivors have meaningful access to supports, both within and outside of carceral systems. For the past decade, Saloni has focused on centering racial equity and multiple pathways to healing in program and policy development for survivors of gender-based violence, work that is deeply informed by her own lived experience. She is passionate about anti-violence and anti-poverty work and dedicated to addressing intersecting issues of power, privilege, and oppression through collective, collaborative, and intentional efforts to undo harm and ensure justice for the most vulnerable in our communities. Prior to her current role, Saloni worked as the Deputy Executive Director at the Office of Crime Victim Supports, the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, and as the Deputy Director of Economic Empowerment Programs at Sanctuary for Families. She received her MSW from the Silver School of Social Work at NYU and her BA in Economics and BS in Mathematics from the University of Chicago. So as you can see, not only do we have really important executive team members from our city, but people with important lived experience as well. So please know that we really take this information to heart and we're really honored to have you both here. I'm now going to pass the microphone over to our moderator, Jose. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tisa, and thank you, Commissioner and First Deputy Commissioner, for joining us for this important conversation. I'm hoping that we can have a just free-form dialogue to share information about what both of our agencies can do and how they support New Yorkers, and in particular, survivors of domestic violence and gender-based violence. So I appreciate that. I'm going to jump right into some of our questions that we have. And I will direct some of these questions to either one of you, but if either one of you wants to jump in and and also answer the question, please feel free to do so. My first question is for First Deputy Commissioner Sethi. Where does the discrimination that survivors of domestic violence or gender-based violence experience come from, and what could it look like? And then more importantly, what could services look like for survivors?
Sure. Thanks so much, Jose, and thanks, Commissioner Palma, and everybody for organizing and being at this event. So I think before we jump in, I want to take a quick second to just sort of define sort of what we're talking about when we talk about gender-based violence, because it's a term that encompasses a lot of different forms of abuse. So our office, we define gender-based violence as any form of violence that takes advantage of people by using unequal power relationships and situational power imbalances that are rooted in society's gendered expectations. So it can include things like sexual violence, human trafficking, stalking, female genital mutilation or cutting, and domestic violence or DV, which includes both intimate partner violence and family violence. It's really important to remember that gender-based violence or GBV can impact anyone, regardless of age, gender identity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, or country of origin, but it has a disproportionate impact on women, girls, transgender, and non-binary people. Its impacts also extend beyond individual survivors. Children, families, friends, and community members can all experience trauma from witnessing or experiencing the indirect impacts of abuse and violence. So when it comes to discrimination, where this discrimination comes from, I think, if you think about like the list of issues I mentioned, there are often things we don't talk about and things that are hard to talk about due to fear, stigma, shame, right? I think there's also a lot of lack of understanding on issues of domestic and gender-based violence. And unfortunately, we live in a society where there's often a fair amount of victim blaming, right? Where people think that somehow this wouldn't happen to me, and because it happened to somebody else, it must be something that they did or something that they sort of chose somehow, right? And so I think all of those, that kind of lack of information, that sort of not talking about it, the stigma, it all kind of compounds that the discrimination that survivors all too often experience, right? And in terms of what it might look like, I think, we want to focus specifically on like employment and housing. So I think, when somebody is aware of your status as a survivor, an employment, it could look like refusing to assign somebody to a new work location for safety reasons, refusing to change schedules because, the survivor has court appointments or custody appointments or counseling appointments. It could be refusing to allow them to use their sick time for any matters related to their status as a survivor. And in housing, I think, this can look, again, oftentimes what we see a lot is refusing to accept a voucher, especially DV-specific vouchers that the city and state issue for survivors of domestic violence. It can also look like, denying survivors housing because they think, you're going to come, and if you're a survivor of DV, that might lead to calls to the police and a nuisance, right, for landlords. And so that might be something that they want to avoid. And it might, look like not allowing survivors to renew a lease after an experience of domestic violence, right? After, especially once police are called, sometimes landlords may not want to renew that lease for the same nuisance-related reasons. Fortunately, the city does have a lot of services available for survivors. And these services really include things like advocacy, legal representation, including representation in housing court, counseling services, right? Ongoing sort of public education and know your rights work, because a lot of this is people need to know that these services are available to them and this type of discrimination exists in order to do anything about it. And a lot of the services can be found at NGBV's 5 family justice centers, which are walk-in centers that provide free, confidential, comprehensive services to survivors of domestic and gender-based violence and their children. And those services are available regardless of language spoken, gender identity, sexual orientation, immigration status, or disability status. And we contract with many of our community-based organizations throughout the city to provide services both at the FJCs and in community as well.
Great, thank you. I think one of the things that might be hard for folks to wrap their mind around if they haven't experienced domestic violence or gender-based violence is how discrimination in these areas can impact housing and employment. Can you talk a little bit about how being a survivor, having experienced domestic violence or gender-based violence, can impact housing and employment?
Sure. So I think, one thing we should mention is that there is economic abuse, right? Especially when it comes to intimate partner violence and domestic violence. Economic abuse is a form of violence that we see a lot of people who cause harm use. And this could look like, denying employment, like not allowing a survivor to work, denying educational opportunities, right? And to advance your career. It could look like taking a survivor's paycheck and making sure that everything goes into one bank account, and then, not providing them access to money that way. And that's sort of the direct economic abuse bucket. Beyond that, even if there is, not direct economic abuse, a lot of times people stay in abusive relationships because of financial needs, right? We live in New York City, where the cost of living is high. It's challenging for everybody often to sort of make ends meet, and survivors are often dependent on their abusive partners for that dual income or for that single income to kind of maintain their stability. We also know that DV is a driver of homelessness, right? And this is homelessness not for economic reasons, but purely for safety reasons. So if you're not safe in your home, one of the options that we have is that you can move into shelter, right? And so we know that in New York City, I think about a third of the folks in the DHS shelter system have cited domestic violence as one of the reasons that they are there, right? And so that is really just for safety reasons. And then the other thing that's, again, more indirect, even if there's not direct economic abuse, is the trauma, right? The trauma and the dealing with the aftermath of experiencing domestic violence in particular, right? We think about what a survivor has to do to feel whole, to feel safe, right? Oftentimes, if you're at work and, domestic violence is all about power and control, in some ways employment can be too, right? And so if you are spoken to a certain way, and what is your reaction, and how does that impact your ability to navigate challenging situations at work? And I think that can often lead to unstable employment. And in addition, oftentimes if you have, if you're going to go see a counselor, and you're going to go see a family law attorney and an immigration attorney and a housing attorney, and have to be in court 5 days a week, right? I think it requires a lot of time and a lot of time to manage all of those things. And sometimes that can make it challenging to maintain full-time employment.
That's a really good point. You mentioned trauma, and I want to bring Commissioner Palma into the conversation here, because you mentioned a couple of things that sparked something. So you mentioned economic abuse, and it's important to note that economic abuse was recently added to the New York City human rights law as a protection, and recognized as a form of domestic violence under the New York City human rights law. Commissioner Palma, you and I talk a lot about how survivors of domestic violence, the trauma doesn't end after the incident of violence, right? It continues, folks can continue to be re-traumatized through discrimination because they've experienced this. So can you tell us a little bit more about the Commission on Human Rights, our work, and what New York City has specifically in line of protections under the human rights law for domestic violence survivors, particularly in employment and housing-based discrimination?
Thank you, Jose. And as I get to lead the city's agency, right? The commission is the city's agency that enforces the human rights law. And as you heard, right, we cover over 25 protected categories across housing, employment, and public accommodations. And I think from today's conversation, right, we are focusing on discrimination for survivors of domestic violence, particularly in housing and employment. And you heard Commissioner Saloni mention, right, how what kind of impacts it had. Survivors of domestic violence may experience, right, because of the situation that they were in, right? So again, if someone is denied housing, or their lease is not renewed because of the situation, right, that's when the commission can step in and help them navigate right through those issues, and prevent them from being further abused on the housing front, right? Not experience that discrimination. I think many survivors often don't want to come forward because of shame, guilt, of people just judging them as they were the person at fault for experiencing domestic violence. And while we know that that's not true, no one should be abused, no one has the right to abuse anyone else. It's happening. And so what our agency focuses on making sure is that New Yorkers know that they are protected under the human rights law, that this agency is here for anyone, who walks through our doors, who calls us, who email us with a complaint or a tip about what kind of discrimination they have experienced. And again, through our law enforcement mechanism, we're able then to bring relief to that individual, right? So education is a key factor. When people know what their rights are, people know how to stand up for themselves, people know, find their voice to wanna make sure that the discrimination stops and that they are not further victimized. So ensuring, right, through the work that we do collaboratively with other city agencies as well, just raising the profile of our the Commission on Human Rights, and making sure that those resources are at the hands, right, at the fingertips of the individuals who may need to call us and use for the issues that they are going through. I think all New Yorkers, right, and in throughout the city are want to seek relief for the type of discrimination that they may be feeling, right? And so our agency ensures that we are able to deliver that service once we know what's going on there. I think on the employment, I know that again, Commissioner Saloni mentioned the right. An individual may not want to say anything at work for fear of losing their job. I know a lot of employers may look at the survivor as a person, right, as now a situation to bring other trauma to the workplace. And so they tend to either cut folks hours, they tend to not want have they tend to try to not push them out of work, right? By making it a little bit harder for them to either be able to deal with the situation that they're in, by not reassigning them to other workplaces where they may be safer, right? And so our agency in those cases is able to step in again and help mitigate those situations, right? And so by having a dialogue with the employer and just and making sure, right, that reasonable accommodations are not being denied based on a person's perceived right of who they are, or if they're in a situation of being a survivor of domestic violence. And so that's whether it's right, reasonable accommodation, allowing them to use their time earned to be able to handle certain situations. The commission is ready and accessible to be able to bring some relief to those individuals.
I'm sorry, Jose, can you try to mute and unmute? It looks like we might have lost your sound.
How about now?
Thank you.
Thanks, Tisa. And sorry, folks, but what I was saying is what you were saying, Commissioner, is really important, because I think we all know that trauma, and specifically experiencing violence, can be very isolating, right? You already feel like in a position where you're alone. and seeking support is difficult. And so I think it's really important for New Yorkers to understand that there are agencies like NGBV, like CCHR, who are here to help support in whatever way we can, right? Because one of the things that I think both of our agencies strive to push the message out is that you're not alone, right? There are support systems here, and I think that's a message that we can't shout loud enough. That folks are not alone, because at the experiencing it is isolating, and then experiencing discrimination is further isolating, right? And with that in mind, I'd like to ask both of you on what your perspectives are on what are some challenges that folks might face when trying to report or trying to pursue actions related to discrimination based on someone's status as a domestic violence or gender-based violence survivor. What are the things that you think are barriers or challenges for folks? Yeah.
I think there's many factors that can play a role, right, in creating or creating or perceive challenges, right. I think, right, we mentioned that an individual may feel shame, and you're already in this situation, and you're already feeling intimidated by the individual who has caused the abuse, and so you want to go before your supervisor or your supervisor or someone, right, who has the authority to give you a response, whether you could take a day off or not, right. And you may feel you're going to be further, you may feel further intimidated at the rejection, right? Thinking that you may be rejected, and those are real feelings you already have to deal with, right? Because of the abuse. But then you think about, do I want to put myself in that situation? Maybe it's just better, to try to go at it alone. And so it's on this, it's understandably, it's we can understand somebody feeling that way. Again, it's up to, right, agencies like ours, agencies like NGBV to just give those survivors the tools that they need, and let them know, right, that we're here for them, that this is something that the commission is constantly working on, right, to raise visibility of our agency, and what New Yorkers' rights are, and what their responsibilities, and what employers, right, and landlords' responsibilities are under the law, and to ensure that no one again continues to be further abused because they're being discriminated against. Everyone in New York City, no matter who you are, no matter what you look like, no matter how you love, you have a right to live, work, thrive in this great city, right, free from discrimination. And so surviving domestic abuse is already a mountain, right? A mountain to have to climb, and we need to make sure that us, in these agencies who have the power to remove these obstacles and barriers and create, stability, help create stabilities for the survivors, right, and help them recreate their lives in a more sound way, that we're doing that for them.
Yeah, thanks for that, Commissioner Palma. I think, to sort of pick up on that, as you were talking, I was thinking, I used to run an employment program for survivors of DV, right? So we would place survivors into employment opportunities, and not one wanted their employer to know, right? That was something we were very careful of. We didn't want them to be stigmatized at work due to the fact they were coming from our program. It was something we navigated all the time. And I think, to put a finer point on what you're saying, that fear of stigma and shame, I think two things, one is, I think it goes against our very notion of professionalism, right? That you're talking about your personal life at work. I think that's very real. I think the other thing is that I don't think there's any survivor I've ever met that the first person they told was their employer about the abuse, right? So they've probably already told other people and may or may not have been believed before, right? Oftentimes they tell people that are close to them that might be uninformed, that might say, that's not a big deal, you can, and those experiences then compound that fear of bringing it up again in an employment setting in particular, where they may not be believed again, right? I think on the housing front, when you talk about housing discrimination, something that we hear a lot from survivors is, they're not sure that they can prove that they were discriminated against, right? And so what'll happen is they'll say, I was looking for an apartment, the management company, the landlord was on it, showed me a bunch of places, kept talking to me. All of a sudden I told them I had a DV voucher and I never heard back, right? And so they feel like something happened. They feel like they were discriminated against, but they're like, but there's no proof. It's just, I'm guessing that's why they didn't call me back, right? And so I think, even as we talk about the housing piece in particular, it's really important for us to let survivors know that they don't need to prove discrimination, right? That a lack of response is enough for CCHR to get involved and take the case seriously. And I think, again, both those pieces really go back to that, not being believed piece, right? Which is really, really important, because many survivors often aren't believed if they're going to people that don't understand their situation.
You're absolutely correct. And I think that's right. That's why the education piece is extremely important, right? At our agency, we tell individuals, if you feel you have been discriminated against, if you think, right, that you have been discriminated against, come to us. It is our job, right, to prove it, not yours. Let us make sure that it was discrimination or it wasn't. We will take care of that end, right? So if it's letting again, right, New Yorkers know, if you have a voucher and a landlord or realtor never calls you back once you disclose your income or form of payment comes to a voucher, then we will make sure, right, to initiate an investigation and again, right, engage in a dialogue where we can prove if it was discrimination or not. But yeah, I totally agree. A survivor has enough responsibility on them already, and the responsibility of having to prove that they were discriminated against is not on them.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I was sort of thinking about too here is also like around the trauma piece, right? Like if we take the basic definition of trauma, which is a lack of control over your own safety, then part of what survivors need to get back is control over their safety and control over their lives, right? And so a lot of times when it comes to these processes, it feels like they could lose control again, right? Especially if we're talking about like employment, right? You may not want to report because once you report, it starts off a whole HR process potentially, right, that then you lose control over, right? So I think, again, going back to the education piece and why it's so important for folks to know like what they can expect, what the steps are, right? And even if it is complicated to manage, because oftentimes survivors are managing so much that it doesn't feel like the most important thing. Having a sense of what happens and having a sense that you understand the process is really, really critical to success.
Thank you both for those answers. I think we've touched on this a little bit, but and we've touched on this through the lens of having a voucher, which in CCHR we talk about it as source of income discrimination. But that's to say that this type of discrimination and for domestic violence doesn't all happen in a vacuum. It happens at intersections, right? And so when someone is experiencing discrimination based on being a survivor of domestic violence, they could also be facing other forms of discrimination. And at the same time, they might be part of other processes or systems of support, right? So I'd like for us to talk a little bit about some of the challenges or added challenges that might be in play when someone is navigating through some support system and might want to report or might have any barriers to reporting within that system. If that makes any sense.
I think you often find, right, again, someone who's in that situation is at the mercy of their abuser. They may not have access to documents that may be required. They may need to, if the individual needs to go into emergency shelter for their safety, their child may need to be moved, and there's children involved. The kids may have to move from school, right? And so there's um, certain documents that you may need, right, to go through those process. And if you have to all of a sudden pick up and go because of the situation, your abuse system, right, still holds all of these important documents that you may need. And so having to then go to the agencies to try to gain access, right, to new documents presents challenge. You also may not be financially stable, right? And so thinking that you may not be able to, move out because you can afford a rent, or you don't want to go into emergency shelter because of the stigma that already exists. So you sort of stay, I can stay a little while longer and endure this for a little while longer, right? Those challenges of just, the stigma, the being under somebody's control, and not not seeing a way out can be, can be, not can be, are devastating, right? And add to again to the survivors will to want, to get out of the situation, but feeling that they can't.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, just to add to that, right? Oftentimes there's just like the logistics of managing everything, right? Which can be so challenging. And I think when you're also dealing with the experience of violence and also trying to make yourself whole, right, in some basic way, and being pulled in all these different directions by different systems, that can be, hugely challenging, right? So I think even when you think about our family justice centers, one of the reasons that the city invested so heavily in this and has 5 of them, the largest network, anywhere, it's because, sometimes we talk about being a survivor as a full-time job, right? Because if you need to go see your children's counselor and your counselor and and have a criminal case and a family court case, right? And have employment needs, like you could be going to 5 different places, and the FJCs try to bring all of those under one roof, right? And I think sometimes when it comes to things like housing, which are challenging anyways, it becomes that much harder to think, I have one more thing that I have to do on my to-do list that I have to figure out, right? And I think that's real, right? And I think of that all the time. It's like sometimes, there's all the stuff that you have to do for your life, and you're like, I don't want to make that call. I don't want to have to call that doctor and get into that, call that insurance company, right? It's like that. It's a natural feeling that you're like, I'm up to here and I can't. And so I think, one of the things that's been really great about the post-COVID world is that a lot of these services can be accessed virtually. Like that makes it so much easier for survivors, right? And to the extent that we can continue investing in those kind of processes and formats that really allow people that we're really meeting survivors where they are, right? Making sure that we're letting them access services as easily as possible, then the more likely they are to sort of access those services.
Commissioner Palmer, you said something really interesting that sparked a question in me. And I think from an outside perspective, it's really easy for someone who isn't going through the experience to say, report this, get out, do it now, right? Like from the outside, it's so easy, right? Because you're not, but you touched about like the circumstances that people live in. Like, do I have the money to leave? Do I have a place to go to? Do I have all those pieces? And so the question that sparks, and I pose to both of you, is what are the types of things that people from the outside can do to be a good support system for folks when pressuring someone to take action in the moment may not be the right thing, right?
I think there's signs that you see. Oftentimes people ignore the signs. You may think it's happening, but you don't dare ask. You mind your business, right? You see certain changes and behaviors in individuals, right? I think again, right, just reaching out to that person, there's a point in time when you're in this situation that you will share with a trusted person, right, what's going on. And I think, at that point, that individual, right, then can lend the support system that to the person who's experiencing the abuse, right, lend that support system to engage in a dialogue, whether these services exist. Do that these services are here, that this is how you can access them? Can I be helpful in helping you accessing them, right? But I think it's just, I mean, it's up to the it's usually up to the individual, right, to or to get right I was in a domestic violence situation, right, and I know at what point I needed to say I need to save myself and my son, right? And so, because of the safety of my child, I needed to take certain steps. And while it was scary and intimidating, and I was in fear of losing my job. I did become, I did experience homelessness. I knew that the safety of my child, right, and my safety was important. So I needed to take certain steps. So as outsiders, we have to continue to raise our voices to let New Yorkers know, to let anyone who's experiencing domestic violence, that there are services out there, that they're ready to help, and just again educating them on where they can find those resources.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of, underscore some of that, I think it is for all of us that care about people that are in, abusive relationships or unsafe relationships, that like jumping to you should leave, you should do this, comes from a good place. Right? It comes from a place where we're worried about their safety, but often doesn't acknowledge like the complexity of that survivor's experience and their lives, or maybe what they want, right? I mean, it's we also know some people choose to stay in relationships because they feel like they know how to manage it, right? And we really have to kind of respect that autonomy. So I think, we always say that the most important thing is to start by believing and listen. Like listen as non-judgmentally as you can.
Right.
Be that supportive ear, because again, the other thing that folks experience often is even their family and friends gets tired of hearing about the situation, right? It's like, oh, it's this again. Oh, you keep talking about it, but you're not doing anything about it. Like, I don't want to hear about this again, right? And so I think even thinking about that and making sure that you consistently stay open, even when it might be the same conversation you've had 25 times, right? But I think that 26th time might be the time where they're, where something clicks, right? So I think that's really important. I'll also offer, we have a website, it's www.nychope, our NYC Hope website, and it actually has a section on what folks can do to support friends or family members that sort of might be in abusive relationships, and kind of gives a few tips for, phrases you can say, or, pointers you could use to really help navigate those conversations, because it can be tricky, right? And it's tricky because you care about the survivor.
Right.
I mean, and going back to something you had said earlier, First Deputy Commissioner Sethi, is that the last thing you want to do as someone who's trying to be supportive is go back to that definition of trauma, right? And pull control away from the person who's experiencing it, right? You want to be that person who's actually supporting and not trying to control their narrative, right? So no, I think when as city agencies and as advocates and as support systems, when we put together these types of roundtables, these forums, these panels, types of things, I think it's really easy for folks to think that like the only audience is to that person who's experiencing domestic violence, right? And I think the reality is everyone here now walks away with information that they have in their back pocket, either for themselves or for someone that they know, right? And
Mhm.
those are really important pieces. And I know Commissioner Palma, you talk a lot about um, our agency has a dual mandate, and while we are an enforcement agency, education is such an important part of that, and um, uh, that's why these types of events are super important, right? I want to bring continuing with Commissioner Palma. There's always this, we hear this a lot. You and I hear this a lot, where I someone says, I've experienced something. I don't know if I should call you. I don't know if I should if this even is discrimination. I don't know if I have any proof or anything. If someone feels like they've experienced discrimination, what would you say to that person?
I think to the individual that's in doubt, call. Let us, again, let us tell you and help you navigate, right? The issue that you've been through. Let us do an inquiry, although not all inquiries become complaints. And it may not be within our jurisdiction, but then if it's not within our jurisdiction, we can, help you or move you to the right place where you can be helped, all right, and connect you to the agency that can help you. If it is within our jurisdiction and it is a complaint, right, we will do the investigation. We'll file the complaint. That right then goes through a process where it can end up, going through a trial at oath or getting settled through a pre-complaint intervention process that we have in our LEB program. But I would just say, engage our agency, because that's what we're here for, right? We're here to let us be the ones to investigate and let us be the ones to have to prove that there was an act of discrimination, and we can then help you navigate the process.
You said something really important, where not everything that comes to us is a complaint, but at the same time, that doesn't always mean that we can't get involved. And you mentioned pre-complaint intervention, which
Right.
is another way that we can help address issues without having to file a complaint. Can you talk just briefly about what pre-complaint intervention is a little bit, and um, how it's different than a complaint?
Sure. Pre-complaint intervention, right? Engaging in a dialogue with both sides, gathering the facts, and then um, trying to create a situation, right, where the the harassment or discrimination stops, but the person who has right, who has done the discrimination or the harassment acknowledges, right, that this kind of behavior is not to be tolerated, right? So that they will engage in or participate, right, in trainings that our agency has, and change the culture of whether the culture in employment or housing or the area, if it was a public accommodation, is to bring relief, right, through cooperative dialogue without having to take a case, an investigation or complaint to trial.
So, Commissioner, walk me through the process of, I experienced discrimination, or I think I've experienced discrimination. I have a doubt. I just heard you say, call us. So I'm gonna take your word. I'm gonna say, Commissioner Palma said to call. So I'm gonna call.
You can
Walk us through
call us,
that
you can
process of,
email us, you can walk into our office. We have borough offices we have offices in throughout the city in all 5 boroughs. But you call us. There's it's an inquiry. Inquiry is done. We do an intake where you will be asked a series of questions. Then depending on, again, right, what the intake yields, if it's a if it's discrimination or harassment, an investigation, filing of a complaint will be done. Then from that process, it goes through a trial or settlement. Again, some settlements are done through pre-complaint interventions where we engage with the employer housing provider, right, to get to get relief for that individual without having to have a dragged out process. And through that process, right, we've been able to get reasonable accommodations for people in housing, right? We've been able to get set-asides from landlords through some of those settlements for not only for that individual who holds the voucher, but for future individuals who may apply after we've done this case, right? We've seen being able to get those resolutions and without again having to drag it out through a trial. We don't hear you, Jose. We don't hear you.
Okay. My microphone doesn't like me today. So we've talked quite a bit about CCHR and what services we offer, and like we're an agency that deals directly with the public, so anyone can come directly to us. I want to just pause and take a moment. And First Deputy Commissioner Sethi, is there anything you want to share about how NGBV supports folks and what services they can offer or connections?
Sure. Yeah, so NGBV's overall mandate is that we coordinate the city's response to domestic and gender-based violence, right? So that's a fairly large mandate. And I've talked a little bit about the Family Justice Centers already. I've mentioned the NYC Hope website, which I think Tisa put the link in the chat where you can access resources and information. We also have the city's 24-hour hotline, which can be reached at 1-800-621-HOPE, which is 1-800-621-4673. And anyone can call and kind of get immediate safety planning, crisis counseling, and connection to other services. I also mentioned that a big part of our role is really to collaborate with city agencies, law enforcement, courts, legal service providers, community-based organizations, and survivors to kind of continually enhance supports for those impacted by DV and GBV throughout the city. So we do a lot of outreach and awareness raising, we do training, we develop and implement programs to serve survivors and their families, and we work on sort of policy recommendations to do that. I think the other sort of pieces which we haven't really talked about much that I also want to sort of highlight is our prevention work. We do a lot of prevention work that really focuses on young people and school-based programming. So we have an early relationship abuse prevention program, which works with middle schools to help young people identify healthy and unhealthy behaviors and develop healthy coping mechanisms and conflict resolution skills. And finally, I want to mention a program for people who cause harm, right? Because I think it goes to this idea of like making sure that we're, I always say it's like more is more, right? There's not just one type of survivor. There's not just one type of need. There's not just one type of experience. And our job as NGBV is really to make sure we have enough options to meet all the needs that sort of diverse groups of survivors have, right? And so our abusive partner intervention program, which is called Respect and Responsibility, really came from hearing from survivors who especially didn't want to engage in criminal legal systems. That they didn't want to, and they didn't want to go into the shelter system. They didn't want to leave their family situation. They just wanted the abuse to stop, right? And so hearing that, really, we took that on as a mandate of like, we need to create programming that helps hold people who cause harm accountable so that the abuse stops, right? And give survivors another option that way. So that program, which is called Respect and Responsibility, is a free, non-mandated program for adults who have caused harm in intimate relationships. And it takes a trauma-informed approach to accountability and behavior change to really help people unlearn abusive behaviors and, again, develop healthier coping mechanisms in the hope that, it prevents future abuse as well.
It's hard to believe that we've been talking for almost 45 minutes already. It seems like really time is flying. But I want to pause and invite folks to type in any questions that they might have to the Q&A function. And as I ask this final question, we've talked a lot about other things. We've talked a lot about resources, but it's a little every panel tries to end with this, right? So if you could have one thing that people walk away with from this conversation that you would want people to know, what would that one thing be? And I'll start with you, Commissioner Palma.
No, I would want an individual to know that they're not alone, that, you know, you may feel that no one experiencing what you have, but you can have a support system, and the city does have services that can help, and people are willing to help. We just need to know when you're ready, how can we help you?
Yeah, and I think in addition to that, I think, you know, it's really important to kind of continue underscoring that, like, the abusive experience is not your fault. You deserve to be safe, right? And so we always say, we see you, we believe you, and you're not alone, right? We're here to support you through this.
Mhm.
Thank you both for this conversation. It's been incredibly educational, and I think the more conversations we have about this throughout the year, not just in October, the more informed folks are, and it is tried and true saying that knowledge is power. And so I appreciate you both sharing your resources, your experiences, and helping to raise awareness in this area. So thank you very much for this conversation. I'm going to turn it back over to Tisa in a moment, but I just want to make sure, any final thoughts before we go from either one of our amazing panelists?
Just
No,
thank you.
I think
Yeah,
no, I was gonna say thank you again for putting you know, the roundtable together, and I think what you said was extremely important. This is not right limited to October. These are conversations that we need to have every single day, and while they are difficult conversations to have, we right, those of us in certain positions have a responsibility to continue to have those conversations. And so we need, again, right, just making sure that people have the resources that they need, and they know where to go, and that they're not alone, that we're here to help.
All right. All right. Thank you, Tisa. I'm not seeing anything in the Q&A. Do we want to just close out with the Human Rights Minute?
Sure.
Unfortunately, it's not loading for me unless you have it ready to load as the co-host.
Oh, I can absolutely do that. Can you just drop me the link in the chat?
Sure. Otherwise, what I'll say is that to everybody who registered, we'd be happy to follow up with an email with all of this great information, all the resources, all the links, all the videos as well. And I will drop these in the chat to you right now, Jose. Thank you for your
Now let's see
great
if technology will be my
moderating.
friend.
Perfect timing for a Human Rights Minute with 1 minute to go.
Actually, I'm going to forward it via email, Jose, because that's not working for me either.
Got it.
Just sent.
So while you forward it to me, I'll explain a little bit about what the Human Rights Minute is. If you don't mind, Commissioner Palma, it's one of my favorite
Go
things.
ahead.
So under Commissioner Palma's leadership, one of the things that we've been able to do at the Commission on Human Rights is to create this Human Rights Minute. And what it is a series of 1-minute videos that try to explain a part of the New York City human rights law, which is, we say this all the time, one of the country's largest human rights laws that exists. And so we try to break it down one bite-sized piece that is understandable, easily digestible, and
deny housing to someone.
And there he goes. But it leaves you with actionable, something to walk away with. So I'm going to play the housing video, and I'm going to hopefully share my screen successfully. So let's see. And then I am hoping you all see it. Great. All right. And let's hope that you can hear it. So if you can hear it, give me a thumbs up.
Because they're a survivor of domestic violence, sex offenses,
can hear
or
it.
stalking.
Survivors are protected under the city's human rights law. Housing providers in New York City cannot treat survivors living in or seeking housing differently.
A housing provider cannot evict you because the police were called to your apartment for a domestic dispute. And having an order of protection against a former partner or a voucher from a domestic violence shelter does not mean you can be denied housing.
If a housing provider tries to tell you otherwise, they may be violating the city's human rights law.
Survivors of abuse shouldn't have to suffer further trauma caused by discrimination and harassment.
New York City is committed to ending domestic and gender-based violence by developing policies and programs, providing prevention education, and community outreach.
To learn more or report a violation, visit nyc.gov/human rights or call 212-416-0197.
If you or someone you know is currently experiencing intimate partner violence, sexual violence, domestic or family violence, human trafficking, elder abuse, or stalking, call the New York City Domestic Violence Hotline at 800-621-HOPE or visit nyc.gov/nychope.
Did you know it's illegal to deny housing to someone because they're a survivor?
So that's just one other way that you can be a support system to those around you, is to follow us on social media, get a hold of these minutes, and when you know that someone needs some help, it might be a great subtle way of saying, here's some information without trying to pin into the situation, right? So we're very proud to offer that kind of quick information to folks, and hope that it's useful to some of you on this call.
Great.
And
Thank
with
you
that,
both so much.
yeah, Tisa, close us out.
Nothing to add. No questions, I'm guessing, because you all did such a thorough job of examining this issue from both of your areas of expertise. Just want to thank you, CCHR, for your partnership and collaborating with us on this Domestic Violence Awareness Month event. And we look forward to partnering with you throughout the year. Thank you to all of our participants. We will follow up with an email with all of the information, social media and account tags, and all the links and phone numbers that you could ever need. And I think the only other thing to say is that you are not alone. So thank you, everyone, and I hope everybody has a great week.